Welcome to the Dairy News and Views podcast, a production of the Iowa State University Extension and Outreach Dairy Team. Our podcast covers current educational, research, and industry tools available for your operation to manage healthy cows and calves while producing the highest quality dairy products. Well, thanks for joining us today on Dairy News and Views from the ISU Dairy Team. I'm Jen Bentley, Northeast Iowa Dairy Field Specialist, and I'm here today with my colleague Fred Hall, the Northwest Iowa Dairy Field Specialist, as he just got done delivering a webinar that we just hosted on rodent control. And I think that's very timely coming into the fall here. We're starting to see colder temperatures. Things are starting to want to go where things are warm. So welcome back to the podcast, Fred.
Thank you, Jen. I think that most of us understand the seasons up here in the northern plains, that as we pull corn off and beans off and the nights get cooler, we're going to see rats and mice move out of the fields. If we've got a good motel, they're going to step right up and enjoy the hospitality. And hopefully we can do some control measures that are going to prevent that. I tend to call them my ups. You seal up, you clean up, you count up, trap up, and bait up. Kind of explained there in the webinar what each of those mean.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. And we always talk about, well, what impact does it have on the dairy operation? You had listed the total loss or the total cost it has on the feed cost. Can you explain that a little bit more?
You know, when we think about just one rat and their cost of feed consumed for a year is $2. But if you have 400, you're looking at $800. If you understand that a 200-gram rat can eat its weight in feed every day. So if you have 50 rats consuming feed every year, do the math there. That's a lot of feed that they are going to lose. The other thing that I think, it's not just feed consumed, but rats and mice for their size produce a lot of droppings. A rat produces 25,000 droppings per year. And USDA has ran those numbers, and in the United States, we lose about $2 billion in feed being destroyed by rodents every year.
That's a big number, Fred. I didn't realize that. We spent all that time putting up good quality feed, and then to have it destroyed or lost by rodents, that's significant. So I don't like rats or mice, but apparently there's ways to identify them. So can you kind of walk us through how we identify a rat versus a mouse?
Yeah, I think easiest thing is we kind of fall back on is size. Rats are larger than mice, but if you have a young rat and a mature mouse, it becomes a little more difficult. I'd look at two things. Mice have a thin, slightly hairy tail, while rats have a much thicker, hairless, almost scaly tail. And then go to the other end and look at the ears. Mice have pretty big ears proportional to their size, where rats have a smaller ear. And then the other thing, especially if you're trying to identify, do we have a population? Rats have fairly large feet. So if you're seeing large tracks and small tracks, you can pretty well say, okay, I understand that we are dealing with both a mouse and a rat population. Some of the other things, if you really are into the science, the nose of the mouse is triangular in shape, while the nose of the rat is blunt and rounded. Some people always say, well, we can see it because the rats and mice are different colors, and that really isn't the case. They can range from a dark brown to a light gray, so that's not a good indicator. And then, of course, if you find the droppings, we know that mice have about a 1/4 inch long droppings with both ends being pointed.
And they can reproduce fairly rapidly too, right?
Oh, yeah. They're breeding machines. They reach puberty in 6 to 12 weeks. They're do not mate for life. So it's kind of like whoever is available. They breed year round. And the thing that always gets me is when you say, okay, they have a 18 to 35 day gestation period every 6 weeks easily. But the litter size can be from 1 to 22 with an average of about 15. So it doesn't take long to see the population swell. Just kind of put this diagram in your head. If you have one pregnant mouse in January, by Christmas, if everything is uninterrupted, you could have 4,500 mice.
I don't want to think about that, Fred. So let's talk about how to get rid of them. You have a integrated pest management plan. Walk us through what we could do to at least control them.
As ag producers, we understand integrated pest management. We first identify what we have, we create sanitation, exclusion, and then as a final plan, we say, okay, do we, use poison? Do we trap? Do we bait? Do we have predation as a cultural practices we can do? So the first thing is, I'd say let's look for signs, droppings, tracks, because mice and rats' teeth grow their entire life. They have to gnaw to keep the tooth at the right size. So things that are being gnawed are really good indicator. I've seen wiring being gnawed. I've seen gaskets being gnawed, doors, door jams. So, that's always a good one. Then, it's obvious the runways, you can see where something's been traveling, especially if you have rats. They have a real oily hide and hair, and you see these grease marks and corners where they bend around the corner or where they're moving against a baseboard, plus urine stains. If you've got empty feed sacks and you kind of go through them, you'll find these urine stains. Good indication. If you're in the house, I grew up in an older home, and you could hear rodents in the ceiling above you at night when the house was completely quiet. That usually prompted Fred to be up in the attic setting traps, but you can hear them. The other thing, especially in a feed room or an enclosed room, feces and urine and the vomit itself have an odor, so you can smell those. The next thing, once you identified an issue, before you set any traps or use any poison, clean things up. Clean up, get rid of the trash and garbage piles, remove the excess that's fallen around the feed bunk. There at the silage pile, you've got a pile of stuff you don't feed. Get that spread in a way. Don't blow grass or clippings against a building. That forms a perfect harborage where they can move back and forth without any problem. And finally, once you've kind of got things picked up, then you've got to start looking for exclusion. It doesn't take much of an opening for a mouse to get through. A 1/4-inch crack or hole is all they need to access a building. For rats, it's about a 1/2 inch. Find those holes, stuff them with coarse steel wool, cover them with sheet metal or hardware cloth. If you have a bottom of a door that's been there forever and it's been gnawed on and chipped out, get a 24 gauge steel sheet, put it into that bottom, and remember that both rats and mice can climb pretty easily. So if there's a knot 18 inches above the floor in that door, you need to have it covered because a rat or a mouse can climb. The next thing, once we've excluded, is we need to think about how can we get rid of the population. Snap traps are been around forever. Multiple catch traps are the mechanical traps we see a lot of the commercial control folks using. And then depending upon the area, glue boards, really efficient. You can see what you've got. The problem with glue boards is they're not specific. Cat can get it, your children can get stuck on it, and you've got to keep some light oil around so you can pour over the cat's paw or the child's finger and work it into that glue so it'll release. Looking at traps, rodent populations have favorite foods. If you've got mice in your calf kitchen and they are really consuming and ripping up bags of your milk replacer, that's a favorite food. If you've got nori rats, they're meat eaters. We all think that peanut butter is what we need to bait a trap with, but research tells us that's really not the best attractant. Could it be used if you've got a series of traps scattered down the side of the barn? Yeah, that could be one of the things, but wouldn't be the only bait I use. Variety is the spice of life, and rats and mice have the same inclination there. The other thing that's probably odd, people don't think about, I always recommend bait some of the traps with cotton balls or string balls. And as weird as it sounds, think about if you have a pregnant female, she is scavenging for these items to make a nest. She can be pregnant every 35 days. So getting rid of potential mama is maybe the wise way to go there. And then always remember that rats especially, but mice also are afraid of new objects. That's called neophobic. And you've got to be patient. Set a trap out and don't bait it. Just get them used to moving around it. Give them a day or two to get used to it and then bait it. And just because you didn't catch a mouse on day 3, give it some time. A lot of people will say, well, I didn't catch anything, so I'm going to move it over to this location. And they just didn't give that trap or that population time to get used to seeing that trap.
All good tips, Fred. And I spent quite a bit of my time working in different calf barns, your calf kitchen. Obviously, that's a good place where mice want to come in because there's milk replacer, there might be calf starter. I always try to make sure that a lot of my feed bags or milk replacer bags were up off the ground, at least on a pallet or something. So yeah, they might be able to scurry in between, but at least it's off the ground where they may not be able to burrow in and get into those bags as easily. I found that really helpful. General maintenance, sanitation of upkeep of taking those bags out and, destroying them so that those mice don't have a place to find a home. Those are always good points. A lot of farms have cats on the dairies. And do you think that's a good biological control to, just let the cats take care of the mouse population?
I'm always reminded years ago when the PQA folks first were coming, and I was involved with that a little bit. We had a big poster that had a cat with that red circle with a bar in it. No cats in the nursery, farrowing building. And I've really translated that to our dairy producers. I think cats serve as a vector for a lot of diseases. It's not offset by the number of the occasional mice we see them with. They're just not very effective at controlling mice. And research is definite that they do not work at controlling rats. So yeah, I don't think that having cats in the barn to control mice really is a legitimate reason to have cats.
Yeah, the other thing was, those high frequency sounds. We started to use them for bird control, right? If we put these high frequency sounds in the freestall barn, it would scare those birds out. And is there any use to those for getting rid of mice as well?
I think it's the same situation. When we do that immediately, it's something new. And any wild animal is going to avoid something new, especially rats and mice. That for a few days, that will empty the location. But they get used to it. So the first brave mouse or rat comes in and gets some feed, and then the second one. And eventually they all realize that it's annoying, but it's not dangerous.
Well, Fred, I'm going to go ahead and link your webinar to this podcast here today. and people can view that for further information, kind of look at your images that you have on there. Got a lot of good information as a follow-up to this podcast. Any last comments you'd like to provide?
I think that we need to be getting ahead of situations. Once we have a major infestation, getting rid of it is always more difficult and more expensive. So as we move through this season where we know the potential is rats and mice are going to be looking for warmth and feed and water, start your rodent control right now rather than waiting until it's overwhelming.
Great. Thanks, Fred. And thanks for the audience for joining us today. And we look forward to visiting with you on the next Dairy News and Views from ISU.
This institution is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or combination inquiries, go to www.extension.iastate.edu/diversity/ext.